All right, well, welcome to part 2. What is an international school? Describing an international school is really difficult because there are so many different types of schools. You have small mining schools in remote areas of the world that might have less than 20 students. And then you also have gigantic international schools in huge metropolises that might have thousands of students on different campuses. Most schools are going to be as I describe them in just a moment. They're generally somewhere in between there. They have a diverse population. You normally will find in the schools I've taught in that about 25% come from the United States, 25% might be locals, and then 50% come from all over the rest of the world. Although you will find some schools that are almost all people from whatever country you are living in, but they still call themselves an international school. So with that being said, I'm sure if you are an international educator, you could find tons of things with what I'm about to present that you would disagree with, but this is generally speaking what I find to be an international school. So an international school is outside of the United States or whatever country you are from. It is a school that caters generally in English. Every international school I know has English as the main language, and they provide an American or a Western curriculum. Oftentimes that involves using a curriculum such as International Baccalaureate or AP Advanced Placement classes towards graduation. There are some schools that are IB World Schools where you would start with IB in the very first primary grades and use it all the way through their diploma program. International schools can generally be divided into not-for-profit and for-profit schools. Of the schools that have been established in most major cities throughout the world, the 200 or so schools that are sponsored by the U.S. Department of State, almost all of those schools are not for profit. However, there has been a surge in for-profit schools around the world. Those schools might have one owner, they might be owned by a business, they might be a company school, they might be owned by an education consortium that has schools around the world. So that's something to think about as you are thinking about international schools. Do you want to go for one of the more established, older, not-for-profit schools, or are you willing to go to a for-profit school? Now, in almost all schools, especially not-for-profit schools, you will have at the top, you will have a board of directors. In many places, that board is elected every year or two on a cycling basis, and it's made up of parents of current students. Some boards replace each other, and they are people that are influential in whatever city you might be in. But generally you have a board at the top which hires a director. Sometimes that director is called the head of school, or there's some other terms as well, but those are the two predominant ones, director or head of school. Below the director, you would have admissions and facilities and all of those types of things, which you probably don't need to worry about at this point. But then the school will be divided into different divisions. You'll almost always have a secondary division, which would be high school, 9th grade through graduation, 12th grade. And then you'll have a primary division, which would be kindergarten or even earlier through grade 8. Some schools also, in fact, many schools have a middle school, so they have a third division, which is almost always 6th grade through 8th grade. Each of those divisions will have a principal. If the school is big enough, they will have an assistant principal. They'll often have counselors, which around the world is not something that is normal in education in many different places. You'll oftentimes have a PE teacher for each division, or even in big schools, a group of teachers that will be PE teachers. In smaller schools, you might have one PE teacher for grades kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. So it just depends on the size of the school. The smallest schools in the world that I've been associated with in some of the more remote places in the world will generally have about 200 students. And if you do the math, 12 or 13 grades, 200 students, you're not talking super big class sizes. You might have one group of about 20 students in each grade. Sometimes in high school that would be divided into 2 sections, or they'd go to different things, but generally that would be 1 or 2 teachers per grade. Then you move up to the next stage, which would be 3 or 4 teachers, and then we're talking about schools that are generally around 800. So it seems like schools, either small schools tend to hover around 200 to 300, bigger medium-sized schools go to around 800 or so, and then you have schools that are much larger than that, where you can have 2,000 or even 3,000 students. Although you won't find those schools in too many places in the world. You can guess which ones those are. In addition to the number of students, let's talk a little bit about the schedule that you might encounter. Most schools around the world start in August and end sometime in June. You oftentimes will have a week off for an October break, but you don't always have U.S. holidays. For example, in 2 schools that had American in the title, I did not get Thanksgiving off, which I found kind of a little bit baffling. You'll oftentimes get a little bit longer of a winter break, and you might get a spring break that is also 2 weeks long. Part of the reason why you have more breaks is because oftentimes international schools don't have professional development days like you might find in a U.S. public school system, for example. I want to finish this off by talking about life outside of school real quick. If you're in a small community that doesn't have an English-speaking population or a very small one, you are going to be a part of that community. And being part of that community, you're going to see students all the time. You're going to see them at restaurants. If you go to a movie, you're going to see them. You're going to see their parents at the grocery store, like every time you go. So you're always a little bit in the spotlight, especially in the smaller posts. But at the same time, you'll be invited to parties. You'll get to know the students very well. I've had students that have invited me to their birthday parties before because it was just a small community, and they wanted to invite me. And it was wonderful, playing paintball in Madagascar with a group of my students. What could be better than that? So you do have these opportunities, but you also kind of are a little bit in a fishbowl. So homework this time, I'd like for you to think about, is international teaching something you can do? Are you adaptable? Are you able to change? Is it something that you think maybe you can possibly do? If so, continue with me. Pick up the book, International Teaching, Teach, Travel, and Save, and we'll find you in an international school soon enough. I want to finish with a little story about myself. So I've lived in all these different places. I don't have any problems moving now. In fact, I kind of like when I move to a new city and there's that period of time where I don't know where the grocery store is, or I don't know how to do stuff, because it's kind of exciting to learn about new cultures and new places and how to do things. Well, the first time I left the United States was in 2003 in order to live. I'd traveled outside the United States before that. And I went to this restaurant with my dad and 2 friends in Miami before I was leaving for the Peace Corps. And I remember I ordered a Cuban sandwich and a Coke. And as we were sitting there waiting for the food, my dad and my 2 buddies were talking about what it would be like to live overseas. And I got so nervous, I just got up from the table. I couldn't even look at my meal, much less start eating it. I was just too nervous. But many years later, I look back on that fondly because I'm so happy that I took that first step to teaching internationally by joining the Peace Corps. So with that, please, of course, leave any questions, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video, which is what are the pros and cons of international teaching.